Welcome to World Hydrogen North America in Houston, brought to you by World Hydrogen Leaders, now part of S&P Global Commodity Insights. I'm here with Nichole Saunders from Environmental Defense Fund. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think my first question is, we often talk about how the U.S. Gulf Coast has a lot of natural gas and carbon infrastructure that's being planned. Can you walk us through what it takes for blue hydrogen in the U.S., at least blue hydrogen that is climate friendly?
Absolutely. So there's a really high bar to meet on getting hydrogen right for the climate. And to do that from a fossil fuel-based hydrogen perspective, they really need to tackle three things really well. Managing their upstream methane emissions, capturing and managing their carbon, and doing all that in practice and not just on paper, so avoiding accounting tricks to make it look better than it is for the climate. So even if you imagine that carbon capture rates are high, blue hydrogen can be 50% worse for the climate in the near term than fossil fuel if they're not managing emissions carefully. And that's predominantly due to upstream methane emissions in the natural gas chain. And unfortunately, industry has been relatively slow of getting ahead of their methane emission challenge. And what's more, managing methane is relatively cheap and easy compared to getting CCS right. And blue hydrogen is going to have a really high bar there in terms of demonstrating they can consistently meet really high capture rates and also build out the carbon infrastructure they need to put that carbon away safely. So can blue hydrogen be done right for the climate? Sure, but industry's really going to have to step it up and work really strong on all fronts for excellence.
So when we're talking about blue hydrogen and derivatives like ammonia, we often talk about 45Q. Can you walk us through of what 45Q is and the latest news about 45Q?
Sure. So 45Q is the federal incentive for carbon sequestration. And I think one of the things I want to emphasize really early is that 45Q incentivizes storing and demonstrating secure storage of a molecule of carbon. It doesn't really tell you much about the life cycle emissions of any product that might be developed and being incentivized through that structure. So 45Q is available for blue hydrogen producers, for ethanol producers, for ammonia, but it's still going to leave a little bit of a question mark in terms of the climate emission. There are questions about the value of 45Q at play right now in Congress, in addition to questions across the board for all of the climate incentives on how they're going to survive the turmoil that really Washington is looking right now at on the budget. And so it kind of remains to be seen. I think 45Q remains really important for the climate, but it really needs to be used in the right ways to make sure it's incentivizing a truly clean product.
I think if we could talk a little bit about the brother of 45Q, what we hear about is 45V, also part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you walk me through how blue hydrogen projects and derivatives that you mentioned, how they can qualify for 45V and if they can qualify for 45V?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's part of a lot of the advocacy, especially those of us in the environmental community did around 45V's implementation. So it was really initially crafted with the idea that it would promote at the highest level green hydrogen and renewable hydrogen production. But if you walk through exactly how it takes life cycle emissions into consideration and how the GREET model, or the model you use for your life cycle emissions, works, it has some really meaningful limitations. It underestimates methane emissions, for one thing, which we've talked about, and may allow for some other things to occur on paper that don't reflect a good outcome in practice. So yes, blue hydrogen can get in the money on 45V with super high capture rates that are really consistent, really strongly controlled methane emissions that we hope are accurate representations and not a reliance on not necessarily the right average that's used right now. And and some other things like steam that they're thinking about using. Is that the right thing to do? That's a real question. But there is going to be a kind of a statement of blue hydrogen's commitment to the real climate outcomes as opposed to economic incentives if they're pushing to get themselves into the higher 45V and working really hard on methane and carbon versus picking something like 45Q that isn't really going to tell the public or international or local purchasers much about their full life cycle emission chain.
But it's either or, right? You can't do 45Q with 45V.
Correct, either or.
Got it. I think my final question is, we're seeing a lot, or we're hearing a lot about some European projects being canceled, as well as hydrogen projects here in the U.S. Tell us a little bit about the carbon infrastructure, because it's not all tied to the hydrogen projects. Most of them is for direct air capture, others for methanol, ammonia. Can you give us a sense of the other projects that you guys are tracking?
Yeah, I think the thing to know is that carbon management infrastructure in terms of CO2 pipelines, CO2 storage and classic storage wells, the same for the other forms of storage internationally. Those pipelines are really limited. The infrastructure is quite limited in the United States on that front. It takes a long time. And honestly, the regulatory structure for things like CO2 pipeline safety is really absent in the US. And so I think across the board, when we think of all of the industries that may need to manage their carbon, they're all going to be competing in the short term for getting access to or building out this infrastructure. And what's really important to EDF is that where that infrastructure is built, it's done safely and it doesn't impact the local environment or the climate or communities in the long run or in the short run.
Got it. Well, thank you for speaking with us and joining us, Nichole. It was great speaking with you.